Hidden camera catches something unusual in elderly comatose woman's room during the night. Margaret Sullivan was at her breaking point. It had been 3 months since her mother, Mrs. Helen Sullivan, 72, had been in a coma at Holy Cross Hospital in Denver, and nothing seemed to improve. The doctors said nice words but offered no real explanation for what was happening. That's when she decided to install the camera. It wasn't about trusting or not trusting the doctors. It was about understanding. She needed to know what happened in that room when no one was around. On the first night of recording, at 3 in the morning, Margaret almost dropped her phone when she saw the images. A huge dog with dark fur entered the room and approached the bed. It wasn't just any dog. It was Bear, the German shepherd her mother had raised for years and that she herself had given away 2 years ago. "I don't believe this," Margaret whispered, pausing the video and rewinding a few seconds. There was Bear, lying down beside the bed and gently licking her mother's hand. How had that animal gotten into the hospital? And more importantly, who had allowed it? Margaret watched the entire video from that night. The dog stayed there for almost 40 minutes, always quiet, always gentle. At one point, she noticed that her mother's heart monitors showed a subtle change in rhythm, as if her body was reacting to that presence. She remembered perfectly the day she had given Bear away to another family. Her mother had cried, but Margaret was convinced she was doing the right thing. The dog was too big, too strong, and Mrs. Sullivan was already 70 at the time. It was dangerous, she thought. "Mum, you're too old to take care of an animal that size," she had said that day, ignoring her mother's tear-filled eyes. Now, seeing those images, Margaret felt a tightness in her chest that she couldn't fully explain. The next morning she arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She stood watching the hallway, the staff, trying to understand how a dog could get in there without being seen. That's when she noticed a middle-aged man in a cleaning uniform pushing a cart down the hall. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. "Excuse me," Margaret called, approaching him. The man turned and she saw the slight startle in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. How long have you worked here?" 3 years, ma'am. Why? Did something happen?" Margaret studied his face. He must have been about 50, maybe a little older. He had tired but kind eyes. "It's about room 412. My mother is there." The man swallowed hard, and Margaret noticed. He knew something. "Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked quietly. "You know my mother?" A heavy silence settled between them. The hallway remained busy, doctors and nurses rushing past. But there, in that small space, time seemed to stand still. "My name is Robert," he finally said. "Robert Miller, and yes, I know your mother. I've known her for a long time." Margaret felt her heart race. "And do you know anything about a dog that's been getting into her room at night?" Robert looked around, checking to see if anyone was listening. "Can we talk somewhere else?" "Not here." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small diner across the street from the hospital. Robert nervously fidgeted with his coffee cup, not drinking. "I know I shouldn't be doing this," he began, "but I can't stop. Bear gets restless every night wanting to come here, and I owe your mother a lot." "Bear is with you? How?" "When you gave him to that family 2 years ago, they contacted me 3 months later. They couldn't handle him. Bear wouldn't eat right, wouldn't obey, he kept trying to run away. They were going to abandon him on the street. I found out by chance through an acquaintance, and I went to get him. I've always loved dogs and... Well, I knew how much Mrs. Helen loved that animal." Margaret felt a pang of guilt. "And you're bringing him to the hospital every night?" "Not every night, about 3 times a week. I come in through a side door I use for work. No one's ever seen me. I'm very careful." "Why? Why do you do this?" Robert finally looked directly at her. "Because your mother saved my life." Margaret fell silent, waiting for him to continue. "I was 18 when my father passed away. My mother was sick, and I had to work to support the family. I dropped out of school in the 10th grade. I found a job at a bakery near where your mother lived. I delivered bread to her house every day." He paused, taking a sip of his now cold coffee. "She always talked to me. She asked about my plans, my dreams. I said I wanted to go back to school, maybe get a technical degree, but that I couldn't afford it. One day she called me inside. She said she had a proposal. She would pay for my studies if I committed to finishing the course. My mother did that? Margaret was genuinely surprised. She did. She paid for 2 years of a technical degree in electronics. I finished it, got a better job. I was able to take care of my mum until the end. I never forgot what Mrs. Helen did for me. And you never told me this, Margaret said, more to herself than to him. She asked me not to tell. She said she helped because she wanted to, not because she expected recognition. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. Now back to it. Margaret ran her hand over her face. How many things didn't she know about her own mother? Her monitors, Robert continued. I've noticed changes when Bear is there. Subtle, but they're there. Her heartbeat gets a little stronger, more regular. I noticed that in the recordings too. You installed cameras. Margaret nodded. I suspected they weren't taking good care of her. I wanted to be sure. And now? Are you going to report me? That was the question, wasn't it? Margaret thought for a long moment. Technically, Robert was violating hospital rules, possibly even some laws, but at the same time, he seemed to be the only thing provoking any reaction in her mother. I need to think, she said finally, but I'm not going to do anything rash. That night, Margaret stayed up late, watching the other recordings the camera had made. In all of them, Bear appeared, and in all of them, her mother's vital signs showed slight improvements during the dog's visit. She remembered being a child when her mother had a dog before Bear. His name was Duke. Margaret must have been about 10 when Duke died, and she remembered how sad her mother had been for weeks. But she also remembered all the joy that dog brought into the house, the afternoons in the backyard, the walks in the park, the way her mother smiled when Duke did something mischievous. When had she forgotten this? When had she decided her mother couldn't have that joy? The next day, Margaret sought out Dr. Stephen Mason, the physician in charge of her mother's case. He was a man in his 60s, with grey hair and an always serious demeanour. Dr. Margaret, he greeted. Margaret was a psychologist, and he always used her title. Any news about Mrs. Helen? Actually, I wanted to discuss something with you. It's about animal-assisted therapy. The doctor raised his eyebrows. For your mother? I have reason to believe it could help. Margaret, your mother is in a deep coma. There is no evidence that she can respond to external stimuli at the moment. And if there is evidence? She showed him the videos. Dr. Stephen watched in silence, his attention growing keener with each passing moment. When it ended, he asked to see it again. These numbers on the monitors, he murmured. Is this real? It is. It happens every time the dog is present. And this animal, where did it come from? Margaret told the story, leaving out only Robert's name and any details that could harm him. This is irregular, the doctor said, but there was thought in his voice, not judgment. But it's also intriguing. Doctor, my mother raised this dog for years. They had a strong bond, and now she's showing signs of response that we haven't seen in 3 months of conventional treatment. Dr. Stephen was silent for a long moment. I need to discuss this with the team. And with the hospital administration. I can't promise anything, but I'll look into the possibility. Margaret left the conversation with a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way. That afternoon she got a call from her daughter Amber, who was 17. Mom, how's Grandma? Same, sweetheart, no changes. Can I visit her tonight? I know it's after hours, but... Tonight? Amber, it's almost 9 o'clock. I know, but I just want to be there, please. There was something in Amber's voice that made Margaret agree. All right, I'll call the hospital and let them know you're coming. Thanks, Mom. Margaret didn't know it then, but Amber had been visiting her grandmother in secret for 2 weeks. Always late at night, always alone. The teenager had discovered that her mother was installing cameras and, out of curiosity, had asked for access to the footage. That's how she saw Bear. And that's how Amber decided to get to know the grandmother she barely knew better. That night, Amber arrived at the hospital around 10 o'clock. The night security guard, Mr. Oswald, already knew her from her previous visits and let her through with a nod. Good evening, Mr. Oswald. Good evening, young lady. Going to see your grandmother again? Yes, I am. You're a good granddaughter. Not everyone shows that kind of dedication. Amber smiled, but inside she felt guilty. For years she had barely visited her grandmother. She was always busy with school, friends, social media. When she did visit, she was bored, eager to leave. Now seeing her grandmother in that state, she wondered why she had wasted so much time. Entering room 412, Amber sat in the chair next to the bed. The light was dim, just enough to see Mrs. Helen's serene face. The monitors emitted their regular beeps, numbers blinking on the screen. "Hi, Grandma," Amber whispered. "It's me again." She took her grandmother's hand, so cold and frail. "I saw the videos. I saw Bear visiting you. He's beautiful, Grandma. I remember him a little. I remember you always smiled when you were with him." Amber was silent for a moment. "I saw other things too. I went to your apartment with the key Mom has. I hope you don't mind. I found a bunch of stuff, photos, letters. Did you know you have a box full of thank you letters from people you helped?" "I didn't. Mom never told me. Or maybe she didn't know either." The teenager felt the tears start to fall. "Why did we never really talk, Grandma? Why did I never ask about your life, your stories? I was so caught up in my own world." That's when the door opened softly. Amber turned, startled, and saw Robert coming in with Bear. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know anyone was here. You're Robert, aren't you? The man who takes care of Bear." He looked surprised. "How do you know?" "My mum told me. She said you bring Bear to visit Grandma. Please don't leave." I'd like to stay too." Robert hesitated, but Bear had already moved forward, heading straight for the bed. The dog sniffed Mrs. Helen's hand and laid his head on the mattress, close to her arm. "He misses her," said Amber, stroking the animal's fur. "Every day," confirmed Robert. "When the time comes, he already knows. He waits by the door." They stood there together, in silence, watching the monitors. And Amber noticed, just as her mother had noticed, that the numbers changed subtly when Bear was present. "This is real, isn't it?" she asked. "She's really responding to him." "I think so. I can't explain it, but I think so." That night Amber stayed until almost midnight. When she finally left, she promised herself she would come back, and that she would do something more. In the following days, Amber began to research everything she could about her grandmother. She talked to old neighbors from the building where Mrs. Helen Sullivan lived. She visited places she used to go to, and in every conversation she discovered a new facet of her grandmother that she had never known. Mrs. Carroll, the neighbor from the apartment next door, said that Mrs. Helen visited an animal shelter every Saturday morning. She brought food, blankets, sometimes paid for veterinary treatments out of her own pocket, the nearly 80-year-old lady said. "Your grandmother has a huge heart, dear." Mr. Paul, the building's doorman, remembered how Mrs. Helen helped his niece get her first job. She knew people, you know, and she was always willing to make a call, give a recommendation. She never asked for anything in return. Each story Amber heard made her more emotional and more guilty. How had she been so blind? Meanwhile, Margaret was having her own revelations. While cleaning her mother's apartment, she found a shoebox full of documents, donation receipts, thank you letters, photos of animals Mrs. Helen had helped rescue and put up for adoption. There was also a notebook. It wasn't exactly a diary, but it had notes, dates, names, small reminders. Margaret opened a random page. March 15th. I called Margaret 3 times today. Wanted to talk about the will, about the decisions I made. She didn't answer. She's busy with work, I imagine. I'll try again tomorrow. Margaret checked the date. March 15th. 2 days before her mother had the stroke that put her in a coma. With trembling hands, she flipped back, looking for more entries. March 10th. I finished reviewing my will with the lawyer. I know Margaret may not understand my choices, but I need to do what I believe is right. Half of my assets will go to the Animal Hope Shelter. They do wonderful work, and I want it to continue, even after I'm no longer here. March 12th. I've been thinking a lot about how to talk to Margaret about this. She's always thought I care more about the animals than about her. It's not true. I love her more than anything. But I've also learned that love isn't exclusive. There's room in the heart for many loves. Margaret closed the notebook, unable to continue reading. The tears were flowing freely now. Her mother had tried to call 3 times. And she hadn't answered because she was in work meetings that she couldn't even remember now. She picked up her cell phone and checked the call history from those days. There they were. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Helen, and she hadn't returned any of them. "Mom," Margaret whispered into the silence of the empty apartment. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." That afternoon she went to the office of the lawyer who had drafted her mother's will. Mr. Henry Norton received her with the gravity the matter deserved. "Your mother was very clear in her instructions," he explained. "Half of the assets to you, half to the Animal Hope Shelter. She also left some specific donations for people she helped over the years." "And she tried to tell me about this?" "She did. She told me she had called several times, but that you were busy. She didn't seem hurt, just sad. She said she'd understand if you didn't approve, but she needed to do what she felt was right." Margaret felt the weight of guilt increase. Can I contest the will?" The lawyer looked her in the eyes. "Technically, yes. Legally, you're entitled to half the estate as the sole direct heir. But may I ask why?" "It's not about the money," Margaret was quick to say. I want to understand. I want to know if my mother did this because I failed her in some way." Mr. Henry Norton sighed. "Margaret, I knew your mother for many years. She spoke of you with great pride, of your professional achievements, your independence. But she also mentioned feeling that you had drifted apart, not from lack of love, but from lack of time, of connection." He picked up a folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. "She left this for you. She asked me to give it to you only if something happened to her." Margaret took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written in her mother's familiar handwriting. "Can I read it now?" "It's yours." With shaking fingers, Margaret opened the envelope. Inside was a several-page handwritten letter. "My dear Margaret, if you're reading this, something has probably happened to me. I hope it's nothing serious, but it's always good to be prepared. First, I want you to know that I love you. I always have, from the moment I first saw you. You were so tiny, so perfect. Your father and I were amazed. I know you might be surprised or even hurt by the decisions I made about my inheritance. I want to explain why. During my life, especially after your father passed away, I found purpose in helping people, helping animals. Every time I saw a stray dog, I remembered how much Bear brought us joy when you were a child. Do you remember him? Do you remember how you laughed when he stole your slipper? Animals taught me something important: unconditional love. They don't judge, they don't demand, they don't expect anything beyond affection and care. And in a world where human relationships are so complicated, that was comforting. I'm not saying you judged me or demanded anything. You lived your life, built your career, your family. I'm proud of you. But at some point, we lost each other. Conversations became short, visits spaced out, and I understood my daughter. You have your life, your responsibilities. The animal shelter became important to me because I saw the impact an animal can have on someone's life. I saw sad children smile for the first time when adopting a puppy. I saw lonely seniors find companionship. I saw families come together around a new furry member, so I decided to split my inheritance. You'll have enough to live comfortably, but the shelter can also continue its work. I hope you understand. And if you don't understand now, maybe one day you will. With all my love, Mom. P.S. Take care of Bear if you can, he's special." Margaret carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. When she looked up, her eyes were red. "She knew," she said, her voice choked. "She knew we were distant. And yet, she had nothing but words of love for you," observed Mr. Henry Norton gently. That night, Margaret went straight to the hospital. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she arrived at room 412. To her surprise, she found Amber there, along with Robert and Bear. "Mom!" Amber stood up, startled. "I can explain." "You don't have to," Margaret said, entering the room. "I know you've been coming here." "How?" "A mother always knows." "My daughter." Margaret approached the bed. Bear lifted his head, alert, but didn't move. "Hi, Bear," she said softly. "Remember me?" The dog wagged his tail slightly, recognizing her. Margaret reached out and stroked the animal's fur. It was soft, well cared for. "Thank you," she said, looking at Robert. "Thank you for taking care of him. And for doing this for my mother." Robert seemed relieved. "I just want her to get better, Mom." "Me too." Margaret sat in the chair next to the bed and took her mother's hand. "I want that too." The four of them stayed there in silence for almost an hour, and in that hospital room something began to heal. Not just Mrs. Helen Sullivan, but also the family bonds that had been neglected for so long. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Dr. Stephen Mason presented Mrs. Helen Sullivan's case at a meeting with the hospital's medical team. He showed the videos, the monitor data, and explained the patient's history with the animal. "The evidence is circumstantial but significant," he argued. "We're seeing responses we couldn't get with any other stimulus in 3 months." Dr. Francis Dixon, senior neurologist, studied the data carefully. "It's unusual, but not without precedent," she commented. "There are studies on animal-assisted therapy with patients who have various types of neurological impairment. The results are promising." "But a patient in a coma?" questioned Dr. Ralph Cook, the youngest doctor on the team. "Isn't that a bit overly optimistic?" "Optimistic would be saying this will cure her," replied Dr. Stephen. "Realistic is saying we're seeing a response we can't ignore. As doctors, our duty is to explore every option that might benefit the patient." The discussion went on for almost an hour. There were valid objections, hygiene issues, hospital regulations, legal liability. But there was also scientific curiosity and, above all, the desire to help the patient. "I'll take this to the administration," finally said Dr. Gregory Myers, the medical director. "But I'll be honest, it will be hard to convince them, and it was hard. The hospital administration had legitimate concerns. Mrs. Constance Reed, the chief administrator, was clear in her initial position. "This sets a dangerous precedent," she said during the meeting. "If we allow an animal for one patient, how do we deny it to others? And what if something goes wrong? If the patient has an allergic reaction? If the animal misbehaves?" "We could establish very specific protocols," suggested Dr. Stephen. "Limit it to supervised visits, require the animal to undergo behavioral and veterinary evaluation, and keep detailed records of all interactions. And who would be responsible if something happened?" "I would," said a firm voice. Everyone turned. Margaret was at the door of the meeting room. "Sorry to interrupt," she continued, "but I'm willing to sign any liability documents needed. If anything happens during Bear's visits, the responsibility will be mine, not the hospital's." Mrs. Reed studied Margaret for a long moment. "Miss Sullivan, I understand your desperation, but—" "It's not desperation," Margaret interrupted. "It's hope. In 3 months, nothing worked. Absolutely nothing triggered a reaction in my mother. Until this. I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm just asking for the chance to try something that seems to be working." The administrator sighed. "I'll think about it. But I'm not promising anything." Margaret left the meeting unsure if she had helped or made things worse. As she exited the hospital's administrative building, she found Amber waiting for her. "How did it go?" the teenager asked. "I don't know. I think all I can do now is wait." But Amber had other ideas. That same afternoon, she created a social media page telling the story of her grandmother and Bear. She didn't mention real names or identify the hospital, but she told the situation with passion and honesty. "My grandmother has been in a coma for 3 months. The doctors did everything they could, but nothing reached her. Until her dog, Bear, started visiting her in secret, and for the first time we saw signs of response. The hospital is considering allowing visits officially, but there are obstacles. If you believe in the power of love, the love between humans and animals, share this story. Not for me, but for all the patients who could benefit from something so simple and pure. Within 24 hours, the post had 50,000 shares. Within 48 hours, it was 500,000. Local newspapers started calling, wanting to do stories. TV shows were asking for interviews. The story had struck a nerve with people. Everyone knew someone who had gone through something similar, or had a pet they considered family. The comments were touching. My dad was in the hospital and only got better after they let our cat visit. Animals have a healing power that medicine still doesn't fully understand. This is beautiful. I hope the hospital allows it. Mrs. Constance Reed saw the post when her own daughter shared it. She read the comments, saw the wave of support, and something inside her softened. It wasn't the public pressure that was convincing her. It was the memory of her own mother, who had spent her final months in a hospital, alone with nothing to make her feel at home. Mrs. Reed remembered how she had wished she could do something, anything to bring her comfort. 2 days later, Margaret received a call from the hospital. Miss Sullivan, this is the administration. Mrs. Reed would like to speak with you. When Margaret arrived at the administrator's office, she found not only Mrs. Reed but also a hospital lawyer and Dr. Stephen. Thank you for coming, said Mrs. Reed. We've thought a lot about your request, and we've decided to allow Bear's visits, under specific conditions. Margaret felt her heart race. Really? The animal will need to undergo a complete behavioral evaluation with a veterinarian approved by the hospital. He'll need to have all his vaccines up to date. The visits will be supervised and limited to specific hours, and you'll need to sign liability documents. But yes, we're going to give it a try. Thank you. Margaret felt tears welling up. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, said Mrs. Reed, but there was a small smile on her lips. Let's see if this works. Bear passed the behavioral evaluation with flying colors. The veterinarian, Dr. Samuel Price, was impressed. This is one of the best trained and calmest dogs I've ever evaluated, he reported. I see no risk in allowing the visits. The first official visits were scheduled for 3 times a week, always at the same time. Robert, who had been officially hired as the animal's handler during visits, brought Bear to room 412 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The change in Mrs. Helen wasn't immediate or dramatic, but it was steady. The doctors began to notice patterns. Her blood pressure became more stable during and after the visits. Her heart rate showed variations that suggested some level of awareness. It's as if a part of her recognizes that he's there, commented Dr. Francis Dixon. I can't explain it scientifically yet, but something is happening. Margaret started coming to all the visits. She would stay there watching Bear lie down beside her mother, his head resting on the bed, his eyes always fixed on Mrs. Helen's face. She loves you a lot, you know, Margaret would say to the dog. She always did. And then she started talking to her mother too. Mum, I read your letter, I read it several times, and I understand now. I understand why you did what you did. And I'm sorry I didn't understand before. It was hard at first, talking to someone who didn't respond, but Margaret persisted. She talked about her day, about Amber, about childhood memories. Remember when you taught me to ride a bike? She said one afternoon. I was so scared of falling, but you ran beside me saying you wouldn't let go, and you didn't let go not until I was ready. I should have done the same for you, Mum. I should have been by your side when you needed me. Amber also started joining the visits. Mother and daughter, side by side, talking to Mrs. Helen, petting Bear, waiting. It was Nurse Claudia Smith who first noticed. She was checking Mrs. Helen's vital signs during one of the visits when she saw it. Look, she whispered, almost in disbelief. Everyone looked where she was pointing. Mrs. Helen's hand, the one Bear was gently licking, had moved. Just a few millimeters, a slight tremor in her fingers, but it was movement. She moved! Amber nearly shouted. Mom? Margaret took her mother's other hand. Mom, are you there? But there was no more movement that day. Still, it was a sign. the first real sign of consciousness in 3 months. Dr. Stephen was called immediately. He examined Mrs. Helen carefully, checked all the monitors, ran several tests. "It's a good sign," he said cautiously, "but we'll have to keep watching. It could have been just a muscle spasm. Or it could have been her responding," Margaret said firmly. "Or it could have been her responding," the doctor agreed with a small smile. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, thinking about everything she had discovered in the past few weeks, about her mother, about herself, about what really mattered in life. She thought about all the calls she hadn't answered, all the times she had said, "Later, Mom, I'm busy right now," all the missed opportunities to simply be present. But she also thought about Amber and how this terrible moment had brought mother and daughter closer together. They were talking more, sharing more. Amber was learning about her great-grandmother, and Margaret was learning about her daughter. "It's not too late," Margaret whispered into the darkness. "Please, Mom, don't let it be too late." In the following days, Mrs. Helen's movements became more frequent, though still subtle. A tremor in her fingers here, a slight facial twitch there, always when Bear was present. The medical team began documenting everything meticulously. What had started as an unusual case was becoming a fascinating case study. "I'm thinking of writing an article about this," Dr. Stephen remarked. "With your permission, of course, it could help other patients, other hospitals consider alternative therapies." "Do whatever it takes," Margaret said. "If it can help someone, it's worth it." It was on a Tuesday, exactly 4 months after the coma, that it happened. Margaret was telling a story from her childhood about when they had gone to the beach and she had gotten lost. Mrs. Helen had been desperate searching for her until she found her building sandcastles, completely unaware of the panic she had caused. "And you hugged me so tightly, Mom," Margaret was saying. "I remember your heart beating fast, how scared you were, and you said, 'Never leave me like that again, sweetie, never again.' That's when it happened." Mrs. Helen's eyes opened, not completely, just a small slit, as if the light was too bright. But they opened, and they moved, searching. "Mom!" Margaret's voice was trembling. "Mom, are you there?" Mrs. Helen's eyes turned toward the voice. Then slowly they went down to where Bear was lying, and something happened in those eyes. Recognition, a spark of awareness. "Call the doctor!" Margaret almost shouted to the nurse in the room. In the next few minutes, the room filled with doctors and nurses, all wanting to check, test, confirm. Mrs. Helen closed her eyes again, tired from the effort, but the damage was done. She had woken up. For just a few seconds, but she had woken up. "That's an excellent sign," said Dr. Stephen, though his voice was heavy with restrained emotion. "It suggests she's emerging from the coma. It could take time, days or weeks, but it's an important step." Margaret hugged Amber, both in tears. "She's going to be okay," Amber whispered. "Grandma's going to be okay." "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so." And Mrs. Helen Sullivan got better. Slowly, gradually, like a flower blooming. Each day she was conscious for longer periods. First minutes, then hours. At first she was confused, disoriented. She couldn't speak, only moan incomprehensible sounds. But her eyes said so much, and always looked for Bear when he was there. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. It took weeks of intensive therapy, a speech-language pathologist to help with speaking, a physical therapist to regain movement in her limbs, occupational therapists helping with basic tasks. Margaret was there every day. She had drastically cut down her work hours, delegating cases to colleagues. Her mother was the priority now, nothing else mattered. Marg, Mrs. Helen tried to speak, her tongue still heavy, the words difficult. "I'm here, Mom, I'm here." Margaret held her hand, gently stroking it. "I'm sorry." No, Mom, you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who should be sorry." Mrs. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I tried to call—" "I know, Mom, I know, and I'm sorry I didn't answer. I'm so sorry." It was a long, painful process. There were good days when Mrs. Helen made visible progress, and there were bad days when it seemed like she was regressing. On one of those bad days, Margaret was sitting by the bed, exhausted, when her mother spoke. "You are tired." "I'm fine, Mom." "No. Amber? Amber's at school. She'll come later." Mrs. Helen made a visible effort to form the next words. "Good, girl. Don't lose her." Margaret understood what her mother was trying to say. "Don't lose time with Amber like you lost with me." "I won't, Mom, I promise." It was during this time that a woman appeared at the hospital looking for Mrs. Helen. It was Dr. Beatrice Moore, a veterinarian. "I heard she was here," said the woman in her 40s. "I came to visit her. You know my mother? I do, for years. She funds treatments for animals from low-income families. She saved the lives of dozens of creatures that wouldn't have had a chance otherwise." It was yet another revelation, another side of Mrs. Helen that Margaret didn't know about. "I didn't know," she admitted, embarrassed. "She's very private about her good deeds," said Dr. Beatrice. "But I wanted her to know we're grateful, very grateful." The vet left a card with several signatures and messages from people whose animals had been helped by Mrs. Helen. Margaret took the card to the room and showed it to her mother. "Look how many lives you've touched, Mom. How many people are grateful for you." Mrs. Helen looked at the card with tears in her eyes. Her hand trembled when she tried to take it, and Margaret helped her, holding the card so she could see it better. "You keep it." "I'll keep it, Mom. I'll keep everything." As Mrs. Helen improved, she began to ask to see more people. She wanted to see Robert, to thank him for taking care of Bear. She wanted to see Amber, to talk to her granddaughter. The conversations were short at first, interrupted by tiredness and difficulty with words, but little by little they grew longer. "Grandma," Amber said one afternoon, "I found your letters, the thank you letters from people you helped." "Oh, yes. Why did you never tell us about that?" Mrs. Helen Sullivan thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "It wasn't to tell. It was to do." Amber hugged her grandmother carefully, trying not to hurt her. "You're amazing, Grandma. I want to be like you when I grow up." "Be yourself." It was during one of these visits that Amber told her about the page she had created on social media. "It went viral, Grandma. Thousands of people shared your story with Bear." Mrs. Helen seemed surprised. "Why?" "Because it's a beautiful story, about love, about how a dog helped bring you back to us." "Bear? Where'd—" "He's here. The hospital officially lets him visit now 3 times a week." As if he knew he was being mentioned, Bear lifted his head and rested it on the edge of the bed, looking at Mrs. Helen. The woman reached out a still trembling hand and stroked the animal's head. Bear closed his eyes, enjoying the touch. "My boy," Mrs. Helen whispered. Margaret watched the scene with a full heart. It had been so hard to get there, but it was worth it. Every moment of pain, of uncertainty had been worth it, but not everything was easy. Mrs. Helen still had moments of frustration, especially when her body didn't cooperate the way she wanted. There were days when she cried in irritation for not being able to do simple things. "Why, can't I?" she would say, struggling to hold a cup. "You will, Mum. With time and practice, you will. And if I don't, then we'll find another way. But we'll keep trying." Physical therapy was especially hard. Mrs. Helen had lost a lot of muscle strength during the months in a coma. Her body was weak and every exercise was a struggle. "5 more, encouraged Sylvia, the physical therapist. "You can do it." "I can't." Mrs. Helen was sweating from the effort. "Yes, you can. Think about Bear. Think about going home and being able to walk him." That usually worked. Mrs. Helen made an extra effort, groaning in pain but not giving up. Margaret was there for most of these sessions. She saw her mother's pain, her frustration, but also her determination. Mrs. Helen had survived so much, and she wasn't going to give up now. "You're strong, Mom," Margaret would say. "Stronger than I ever realized." And it was true. Margaret was discovering a new admiration for her mother, not just for her generosity and kindness, but also for her willpower and courage. During this time, Dr. Stephen Mason kept his word and wrote an article about Mrs. Helen's case. It was published in a respected medical journal titled Animal-Assisted Therapy in Comatose Patients, a Case Study. The article sparked discussion in the medical community. Some doctors were skeptical, arguing it could have been just coincidence. Others were intrigued and began considering implementing similar programs in their own hospitals. "Regardless of what others think," Dr. Mason said to Margaret, "it worked for your mother. And if it works for even one more person, it's worth it." The hospital, seeing the positive response from both the community and the media, decided to implement a pilot program for animal-assisted therapy. Mrs. Constance Reed led the initiative. "If it weren't for Mrs. Helen's case," she admitted, "I would never have considered this. But I saw the impact with my own eyes. And if we can help more patients this way, we have an obligation to try." Robert was invited to help coordinate the program. He was nervous, but honored. "I never thought it would come to this," he told Margaret. "I just wanted to help Mrs. Helen. And you did, more than you know." Meanwhile, Mrs. Helen continued to improve. After 2 months of intensive therapy, she was able to speak in full sentences, still halting, still with some difficulty, but understandable. "Margaret," she said one afternoon, "thank you." "For what, Mom?" "For being here, for not giving up on me." "I would never give up on you, Mom." "I know you were busy, with work, with life, I understand." "No, that's no excuse. I should have made time. You always made time for me when I was a kid." Mrs. Helen Sullivan held her daughter's hand. "Let's not look back. Let's look forward." "Forward," agreed Margaret, squeezing her mother's hand. Around that time, a new challenge arose. Margaret was at her mother's apartment organizing some documents when she found a pile of unpaid bills, medical bills mostly. She added them up and the amount was substantial. Mrs. Sullivan had a good health insurance plan, but there were still expenses that weren't covered. And with the months of hospitalization, the amount had piled up. Margaret knew her mother had savings, but would it be enough? And if it wasn't? She spoke with Mr. Henry Norton, the lawyer. "Your mother's savings can cover the medical costs," he said, after reviewing the numbers. "But it will drain most of it, and she still has months of therapy and rehabilitation ahead." "What about the will?" "The will only takes effect after death. It doesn't apply now." Margaret ran her hand through her hair, frustrated. "What do I do?" "You could use your own resources, or if your mother agrees, she could revise the will, reduce the donation to the shelter." But Margaret knew that would break her mother's heart. That donation was important to her. "Let me think," Margaret said. That night she talked to Amber. "Honey, I need to tell you something. Tell you. Grandma's having financial trouble." "Because of the hospital?" "Yes, her savings will cover the costs, but there won't be much left over, and she still has months of treatment ahead." "So? I'm going to use my savings to cover what's missing. But that means we'll have to make some adjustments, maybe cancel that trip we planned." "Mom, you don't even have to say it. Grandma is more important. Way more important than any trip." Margaret hugged her daughter, proud. "You're amazing, you know that." "I learned from Grandma." But when Margaret told Mrs. Sullivan about the situation, the reaction was different from what she expected. "No," Mrs. Sullivan said firmly. "I'm not going to let you use your savings. Mom, I want to do this." "I know, but you don't have to. I have a plan." "What plan?" Mrs. Sullivan asked to speak with Mr. Henry. When the lawyer arrived, she got straight to the point. "I want to sell my apartment." "Mom," Margaret protested. "No, it's your home. It's an apartment too big for me, it always was. I only kept it because it was full of memories, but memories are in the heart, not in the walls." "But where will you live when you leave the hospital?" Mrs. Sullivan looked at her daughter. "I was thinking, if you don't mind, maybe I could stay with you and Amber for a while. until I fully recover." Margaret felt the tears coming. "Of course, Mom. You're always welcome. Then it's settled. We'll sell the apartment. The money will cover the medical costs and leave some left over for the animal shelter." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." The decision brought financial relief, but also an emotional shift. For Margaret, it meant having her mother living with her, something that hadn't happened since she had moved out at 18. And for Mrs. Sullivan, it meant leaving behind the home where she had lived for 20 years, where she had raised Bear, where she had spent so many moments alone. "It won't be easy," Mrs. Sullivan admitted. "No, but we'll be together. And that makes all the difference." The apartment was put up for sale, and to everyone's surprise, it sold quickly. A young couple with a baby on the way was looking for something exactly that size and in that location. "They seem happy," Mrs. Sullivan commented when she met the buyers. "They'll make good memories there." Meanwhile, Mrs. Helen's rehabilitation continued. She was making remarkable progress. She could already walk with the help of a walker, and her speech was almost fully recovered. "You're one of the most impressive recovery cases I've ever seen," commented Dr. Francis Dixon, "especially considering your age and the time you spent in a coma." "I had good motivation," replied Mrs. Helen, stroking Bear, who as always was by her side during the visit. Hospital discharge was scheduled for a Friday, 5.5 months after Mrs. Helen had been admitted in a coma. She would be discharged to Margaret's house, where she would continue with outpatient therapy. "Are you ready?" Margaret asked on the morning of the discharge. "Nervous," admitted Mrs. Helen, "but ready." Robert came to say goodbye. Tears were in his eyes. "Mrs. Helen, it was an honor to take care of Bear for you, and to see your recovery. It was a miracle. The miracle was you not giving up, not on me nor on Bear. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep coordinating the animal therapy program here, and I know you'll be happy to hear. We already have 5 patients benefiting." "That makes me very happy." The medical team insisted on saying goodbye too. Dr. Stephen, Dr. Francis, the nurses who had cared for her for months, all were emotional. "You taught us something important," said Dr. Stephen. "You taught us never to underestimate the power of connection, whether with people or animals. Thank you for that. Thank you all for not giving up on me when everything seemed lost." The hardest goodbye was with Mrs. Constance Reed. The administrator had come in person. "Mrs. Helen," she said, "when your daughter came to ask me to allow Bear's visits, I almost said no. I was worried about protocols, regulations, but your story reminded me why I went into this field. It's about caring for people. Thank you for reminding me of that. And thank you for having the courage to try something different." When they finally left the hospital, Mrs. Helen stopped at the door and looked back. She had spent months in that place fighting to survive, to recover. Now she was going home, to a new home, a new life. "Ready?" Margaret asked. "Ready." Bear barked softly as if agreeing. The adjustment to the new routine wasn't easy for anyone. Mrs. Helen was used to living alone, to having her independence. Now she depended on help for many things. Margaret had to balance caring for her mother, working, and still being a mother to Amber. There were moments of tension, of exhaustion. "Mom, I need you to take your medication now," Margaret would say late at night, exhausted from a long day. "I already took it." "No, you haven't. It's 10 o'clock. The medication is at 10. "Okay, I'm sorry." But there were also moments of joy, like when Mrs. Helen managed to shower on her own for the first time. "I did it," she called from the bathroom, "without help." Margaret and Amber celebrated as if it were a great victory. And it was. Or when Mrs. Helen made breakfast for them on a Saturday morning. "It's not a big deal," she said, setting the table. "Just bread, coffee, and fruit." "It's perfect, Mom," said Margaret. Perfect. Bear adapted well, too. He had a corner in the living room that Margaret had prepared for him, with a soft bed and his favorite toys. But most of the time he spent by Mrs. Helen's side, as he always had. "He loves you so much," Amber commented, watching Bear follow her grandmother around the house. "And I love him, I always have." It was during those weeks that Margaret began to truly get to know her mother. Not as the distant, busy figure from her youth, but as a whole person, with stories, dreams, and regrets. "Mom," Margaret asked one night as they drank tea in the living room, "do you regret anything in life?" Mrs. Helen thought for a moment. "I regret not being more open with you, not sharing more of what I was doing, what I was thinking. I thought I was giving you space to live your life, but maybe I gave too much space. And I should have asked more. I should have been more interested. We were two people trying to do the best we could. It's nobody's fault. But now we have a second chance." "We do," agreed Mrs. Helen Sullivan, "and I'm going to take it." And they did. They started having long conversations about everything. Politics, religion, relationships, things they had never discussed before. Mrs. Helen Sullivan told how she met Mariana's father, about the early years of marriage, about the challenges they faced. "Your father was a good man," she said. "He wasn't perfect, nobody is. But he was kind, and he loved me. I miss him every day." "How did you cope when he passed away?" Mariana had never asked that before. She was in college when her father died, and she only came back for the funeral. Then she returned to school without really processing her mother's grief. "I didn't cope well at first. I felt lost. We had plans, you know. We were going to travel when he retired, visit places we always wanted to see. And suddenly, he wasn't there anymore." "How did you get through it?" "I don't know if I've completely gotten through it. I learned to live with the loss, and I found purpose in helping others. Every animal I rescued, every person I helped, made me feel useful again." "I should have been there for you more. You had your life, daughter. I can't blame you for that. But I can blame myself." Mrs. Helen Sullivan took her daughter's hand. "So let's make a deal. No guilt, for either of us. Let's focus on now, on the future. Okay?" "Okay." Amber Sullivan sometimes watched these conversations, learning about her mother and her grandmother, but also about relationships, about the importance of communicating, of caring. One afternoon, Amber was helping her grandmother organize some old photos when she found a box of letters. "Grandma, what are these?" "Oh, those are old letters from your grandfather mostly. Can I read them?" Mrs. Helen Sullivan hesitated, then nodded. Amber opened one of the letters and began to read. It was a love letter, written decades ago, full of tenderness and promises. "Grandpa wrote that?" "He did. He wasn't much for words in everyday life, but when he wrote beautifully." Amber read a few more letters, each more moving than the last. "You had a beautiful love. We did. It wasn't perfect. We had our arguments, our misunderstandings, but it was real and it was ours. I want something like that someday. You will, my dear, when you find the right person. But remember, love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. It's choosing every day to be present, to care, to forgive." These lessons, seemingly simple, stayed with Amber. She began to see relationships differently, to value depth over superficiality. Meanwhile, Mariana was having her own revelations. She had spent years focused on her career, building a reputation as a competent psychologist, but in the process, she had neglected important relationships. "I became exactly what I always criticized in others," she confessed to her mother one night. "Always busy, always with misplaced priorities. You're realizing that now, and you're changing. That's what matters. But I wasted so much time, and you have plenty of time ahead. Use it well." Mariana took that lesson to heart. She began to turn down cases that would take too much of her time, focusing on quality over quantity. She spent more time with Amber, truly listening to what her daughter had to say. "Mom, you're different," Amber commented one day. "Different how?" "More present. Calmer. I like it." "Me too." It was during this period that Dr. Beatrice Moore, the veterinarian, contacted her again. She had a proposal. "Mrs. Helen, I know you're still recovering, but I wanted to talk to you about an idea I had." "Go ahead." "What if we started a foundation, an organization dedicated to helping animals and people in need? We could formalize the work you've already been doing, but on a larger scale. I'd contribute my veterinary knowledge and you'd bring your experience and connections. Mrs. Helen was silent, thoughtful. I'm not sure I have the energy for something like that. I'm still recovering. It doesn't have to be right now. But think about it. With a foundation, we could help so many more animals, so many more people. Mrs. Helen promised to think it over, and she did think about it a lot. What do you think? She asked Margaret. I think if it's something that will make you happy, you should do it. But don't overwhelm yourself. I could start slowly, maybe just as a consultant at first, let other people do the heavy lifting. That sounds reasonable. After a few weeks of discussions and planning, the Animal Hope Foundation was officially established. Mrs. Helen was the honorary president, Dr. Beatrice was the executive director, and Robert was asked to be the program coordinator. I never thought I'd do something like this, Robert said at the first official meeting. And I never thought I'd be here alive and making plans, Mrs. Helen replied. Life surprises us. The foundation started small, but with big ambitions. The first project was to expand the animal therapy program at Holy Cross Hospital. The second was to create a fund to help low-income families care for their pets. No one should have to choose between feeding their family or caring for their animal, Mrs. Helen said in an interview for a local newspaper. Animals are family too. Mrs. Helen and Bear's story gained even more attention with the foundation's creation. National newspapers ran features, TV shows requested interviews, always with the same theme: love, second chances, and the healing power of animals. But Mrs. Helen didn't let the fame go to her head. In the end, she told Margaret, this isn't about me. It's about how many animals we can help, how many lives we can touch. You've always been like that, Mom, always thinking of others. I learned that from your grandmother, my mother. She used to say, the happiness you give always comes back to you. And she was right. As the months went by, life found a new, normal rhythm. Mrs. Helen continued with therapy, but increasingly less intensive. She regained almost all her mobility and independence. I'm thinking about renting a small apartment, she told Margaret one day. Margaret felt a pang of sadness, but understood. You don't have to, Mom. You can stay here as long as you like. I know, and I'm so grateful for that. But I need my own space too, and you and Amber need your privacy. It'll be strange not having you here every day. I'll be just a few blocks away, and you can visit me any time. In fact, I insist you visit often. The apartment Mrs. Helen rented was small but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. It had a small yard where Bear could play. It's perfect, Mrs. Helen said when she saw it for the first time. Margaret and Amber helped her move. She didn't have many things since most of the furniture from the old apartment had been sold along with the property, but she had the essentials. I'm going to miss you, Grandma, Amber said, hugging her grandmother. I'll be right here always. And she was. Family Sunday dinners became a tradition, sometimes at Margaret's house, sometimes at Mrs. Helen's, always with stories, laughter, and, of course, Bear circling around begging for food. The foundation began to grow. They secured donations from local businesses, organized adoption events, and created educational programs on responsible pet care. We're making a difference, Dr. Beatrice said at a monthly meeting. In the last quarter, we helped 15 families with veterinary costs, placed 23 animals in permanent homes, and expanded the therapy program to 2 more hospitals. Mrs. Sullivan smiled proudly. This is just the beginning. 1 year after waking from her coma, Mrs. Helen Sullivan organized a special event at Holy Cross Hospital. It was a celebration of the animal therapy program, but also a way to thank everyone who had helped in her recovery. The hospital's event hall was full. Doctors, nurses, patients who had benefited from the program, volunteers, family members, everyone was there. A year ago, Mrs. Sullivan began, standing on the small stage. I was in a coma, with no prospects of recovery. Today I'm here thanks to many people, but especially thanks to this friend. She pointed to Bear, who was lying at her feet. A dog brought me back. I don't know how to explain it scientifically. The doctors have their theories, but I know one thing. Love heals. Whether it's the love of an animal, a daughter, a granddaughter, or friends, love heals. There was applause. Mrs. Sullivan waited for them to quiet down before continuing. I want to especially thank Robert, who risked his job to bring Bear to me, to Dr. Francis and Dr. Stephen, who believed this could work, to Mrs. Reed, who had the courage to approve something unconventional, and to my daughter Margaret and my granddaughter Amber, who never gave up on me. Margaret was crying in the front row, Amber by her side. They stood up and went to the stage, hugging Mrs. Sullivan. "This is all yours too," Mrs. Sullivan said to them. "Without you, none of this would have happened." The event went on for hours, with people sharing their own stories of how animals had impacted their lives. It was moving and inspiring. When it finally ended and everyone left, only Mrs. Sullivan, Margaret, Amber, Robert, and Bear remained. "It was beautiful, Grandma," said Amber. "It was, and it's only going to get better." They left the hospital together, walking slowly to the cars. The night was pleasant, with stars visible in the sky. "You know," said Mrs. Sullivan, "when I was in a coma, sometimes I was aware of what was happening around me. Not always, but sometimes. I heard voices, felt touches, and I remember feeling Bear beside me. I remember thinking that if he was there was a reason to come back." "You remember that?" asked Margaret, surprised. "Fragments, like pieces of a dream. But I remember thinking there were people who cared, and that made a difference." That night, Margaret had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about everything that had happened in the last year. How she had almost lost her mother, how she had discovered so many things about her and about herself. She stared at the ceiling of her room, reflecting. A year ago, she was focused on work, on building a successful career. Now, success had a different meaning. It was about relationships, about being present, about making a difference in the lives of the people she loved. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered into the darkness, "for teaching me this." In her apartment, Mrs. Helen Sullivan was having similar thoughts. Lying in bed with Bear at her feet, she thought about how unpredictable life is. A stroke had nearly killed her. But it had also brought her daughter back. It had created opportunities to make more of a difference than she ever thought possible. It had shown that it's never too late for changes, for reconciliations, for new beginnings. "It was worth it," she said to Bear, stroking his head. "All the suffering was worth it." The following months were ones of continuous growth. The foundation expanded its operations. The relationship between Mrs. Sullivan and Margaret deepened even further, and Amber started volunteering at the foundation on weekends. "I'm thinking about studying veterinary medicine in college," Amber announced at a Sunday dinner. "Really?" Margaret was surprised. "Yes. Grandma showed me how important this work is, and I want to be part of it." Mrs. Helen Sullivan took her granddaughter's hand. "You're going to be a great veterinarian." "I'll try." That Christmas was special. It was the first Christmas they spent together, truly together, in years. Margaret and Amber spent Christmas Eve preparing the house, and Mrs. Helen brought desserts she had made. "I didn't overdo it in the kitchen this time," she assured them. "I know my limits now." "It looks delicious, Mom." They exchanged simple but meaningful gifts. Margaret gave her mother a photo album she had put together, with pictures from their entire journey over the past year. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Helen said, flipping through the pages with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful. I wanted to document our story. Our real story." Amber gave her grandmother a new collar for Bear, personalized with his name in gold letters. "He deserves something special." Bear seemed to approve, wagging his tail when they put it on him. And Mrs. Helen gave Margaret and Amber something she had kept for years, jewelry from her own mother, Amber's great-grandmother. "I want you to have this, not to keep in a drawer, but to wear, to remember where you came from." It was more than jewelry. It was history, legacy, connection. That night, sitting in the living room after dinner with Bear sleeping near the Christmas tree, the three of them talked about the future. "Where do we go from here?" Amber asked. "Wherever we want," Mrs. Helen replied. "The future is ours to build." "Together," Margaret added. "Always together," Amber agreed. And they were. In the months and years that followed, they stayed close. It wasn't always easy. There were still disagreements, moments of frustration. But something was different now. There was communication. There was a conscious effort to understand one another. There was love expressed not just in words, but in actions. The Animal Hope Foundation grew and became a national benchmark in animal-assisted therapy and responsible care. Mrs. Helen, even at her advanced age, remained active, giving lectures, inspiring others. Robert found his calling in the work, eventually going back to school to become an animal behavior technician. His gratitude toward Mrs. Helen never waned. Dr. Stephen Mason published more articles on the case, contributing to wider acceptance of alternative therapies in the medical community. Holy Cross Hospital became a pioneer in the field, receiving doctors from across the country to learn about its programs. And Bear? Bear lived 7 more happy years, always by Mrs. Helen's side. When his time finally came, it was peaceful, sleeping in his favorite bed, with Mrs. Helen's hand resting on his head. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered, tears streaming down. "Thank you for saving me." Bear's passing was hard for everyone, especially Mrs. Helen, but she found comfort in knowing he had lived a full, loved and meaningful life. "He wasn't just a dog," she said at the small memorial they held for him. "He was a teacher. He taught us about unconditional love, about perseverance, about the importance of being present, and I'll carry those lessons with me always." After an appropriate period of mourning, Dr. Beatrice Moore suggested something to Mrs. Helen. "There's a dog at the shelter. He was rescued a few weeks ago and he's scared of everything and everyone, but I think you could help him, and maybe he could help you too." Mrs. Helen hesitated. She still missed Bear, but she also knew there was room in her heart for more love. The dog was a mix of breeds, medium-sized, with sad eyes that seemed to have seen a lot of pain. "He was abandoned," Dr. Beatrice explained. "Mistreated too, as far as we can tell. He doesn't trust anyone." Mrs. Helen slowly approached, making no sudden movements. She sat down on the floor, something that wasn't easy at her age, and simply waited. The dog watched her from a distance, wary. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm never going to hurt you." It took almost an hour, but eventually the dog came closer. He sniffed Mrs. Helen Sullivan's hand, then quickly backed away. But it was a start. "I'm taking him," Mrs. Helen decided. "Are you sure? He's going to be a handful." "I'm sure, and it'll be worth it." She named the dog Faith, because that's what he represented. Faith in healing, in new beginnings, in never being too late to love and be loved. The adjustment was hard. Faith was afraid of everything. Loud noises, sudden movements, even food sometimes. But Mrs. Helen was patient. "We have all the time in the world," she would say. "There's no rush." Margaret and Amber helped. Frequent visits, always calm, always gentle. Gradually, Faith began to trust. The turning point came 3 months later. Mrs. Helen was sitting on the couch, reading a book, when she felt something. Faith had placed his head in her lap. It was the first time the dog had initiated physical contact. "Hello, my love." Mrs. Helen stroked his head gently. "I'm happy to see you too." From that day on, Faith began to flourish. Fear gave way to trust. Sadness gave way to joy. "It's beautiful to see," commented Dr. Beatrice Moore during one of the follow-up visits. "You have a gift, Mrs. Helen." "It's not a gift, it's patience and love. Anyone can do this." But not everyone did. Mrs. Helen did. She always had, and she would keep doing it as long as she had the strength. The years passed. Mrs. Helen grew older, as everyone does. Her hair turned whiter, her steps slower, but her spirit remained strong. On her 90th birthday, Margaret threw a party. Not too big, since Mrs. Helen didn't like a lot of commotion, but with all the important people there. 90 years, said Mrs. Helen, looking at the candles on the cake. "I never thought I'd make it here." "Especially after the coma," Margaret joked. "Especially after the coma," Mrs. Helen agreed, laughing. At that party, Amber, now a veterinarian working at the foundation, made an announcement. "Grandma, I want to tell you something. We're expanding the foundation. We're going to open a rehabilitation center for abused animals, a place where they can heal, learn to trust again before they're put up for adoption. Amber, that's wonderful. And we're going to call it the Apollo Center, in honor of the dog who saved you and changed everything." Mrs. Helen couldn't hold back the tears. He would be proud. He would. And you should be proud too. None of this would exist without you. It was true. Everything had started with one woman and her love for a dog, and it had grown into something much bigger. It had touched hundreds of lives, saved countless animals, changed hospital policies. But for Mrs. Helen, the biggest impact had been on her own family. It had reconnected her with her daughter. It had helped shape her granddaughter into a compassionate and dedicated woman. It had created a legacy that would last beyond her lifetime. "You know," she said to Margaret that night after everyone had left, "I used to worry that you wouldn't understand me, that you'd think I loved animals more than people. And now? Now I know you understand that love isn't limited. We can love many things, many people, many creatures all at the same time, and each love makes us more complete." Margaret hugged her mother. "I understand, Mom, I finally understand." And she did. It had taken time. It had taken pain and near loss. But it had been worth it. 3 years later, on a quiet spring morning, Mrs. Helen didn't wake up. It was peaceful, painless in her own bed, with Faith lying at her feet. Margaret received the news with tears, but also with gratitude. Gratitude for all the extra years they'd had. For all the conversations, all the Sunday dinners, all the memories made. The funeral was well attended. There were people Mrs. Helen had helped decades ago, animals she had saved, or rather, their owners, doctors and nurses from Holy Cross Hospital, members of the foundation. All came to pay their respects. "She touched so many lives," said Dr. Stephen Mason during the service, more than she probably knew, and her legacy will continue living through the foundation, through the programs she helped create, through every animal she saved and every person she inspired. Margaret also spoke, her voice choked but steady. "My mother wasn't perfect. No one is. But she was good. She was kind. She saw a need and did something about it. Not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And she taught me, especially in the last years of her life, that it's never too late for change. It's never too late for reconnections. It's never too late for love." Amber placed Bear's collar on the coffin, along with a photo of Mrs. Helen with all her dogs over the years. "You're with them now, Grandma," she whispered. "With Bear, with Duke, with all of them." Mrs. Helen's will was exactly as expected. Half of her assets, what was left after medical expenses and the creation of the foundation, went to Margaret. The other half went to the Animal Hope Foundation, with specific instructions on how it should be used. But there were also letters she had written in the last years, to be delivered after her passing. The letter to Margaret said, "My dear daughter, if you're reading this, I've already gone. Don't be sad for too long. I lived a long life, and, in the end, a happy one. Thank you for giving me a second chance. For not giving up on me when I was in a coma. For learning to understand me even when it was hard. You've become a wonderful woman, an incredible mother, a devoted daughter. I'm so proud of you. Continue the Foundation's work if you can. But more importantly, keep being present in Amber's life. She needs you, and you need her. Love fully. Forgive quickly. Live completely. With all my love. Always, Mom." Margaret folded the letter carefully and put it away. Next to the first letter she had received from her mother years ago from the lawyer, treasures she would keep forever. For Amber, the letter said, "My dear granddaughter, you brought so much joy to my last years. Thank you for giving me time, for taking an interest in my life, for continuing my work. Be the veterinarian you were born to be. Treat every animal with compassion, and always remember, they can't speak our language, but they have so much to tell us. Take care of your mother. She's stronger than she seems, but everyone needs support. And take care of Faith. He'll need you. I love you more than words can say, Grandma." Amber cried when she read it. But she also smiled, Her grandmother, even in her final goodbye, was thinking of others. Time passed, as it always does. The pain of loss eased, making room for happy memories. Margaret took over the honorary presidency of the foundation, a role Mrs. Helen had held. It wasn't an active day-to-day role, but she was present for important decisions, carrying her mother's vision forward. Amber became the veterinary director of the Apollo Center when it finally opened. It was a beautiful, spacious place, designed specifically to help traumatized animals heal. "Grandma would be proud," Margaret said on opening day. "She would," Amber agreed, "and I hope she's watching wherever she is." Faith lived 5 more years after Mrs. Helen's passing. He spent those years with Amber, being an important part of the family, helping to train other dogs at the center. When his time finally came, it was also peaceful, surrounded by love. 10 years after Mrs. Helen's passing, Margaret was organizing the 20th anniversary of the Animal Hope Foundation. It was a big event, with hundreds of participants. 20 years, said Dr. Beatrice, now grey-haired but still active. 2 decades making a difference. My mother would be impressed. Your mother planted the seeds. We just watered and tended the garden. During the event, Margaret was invited to speak. She walked up to the stage and looked at the audience. So many familiar faces, so many success stories. "When my mother was in a coma," she began, "I didn't know if she would survive. And if she did, I didn't know if she'd be the same person. But she survived. And yes, she was different. She was more open, more connected, more present. Or maybe she'd always been that way, and I just had never paid attention." She paused, emotional. What I learned from that time, and from all the years that followed, is that it's never too late. It's never too late for change, for reconciliations, to start making a difference. My mother started this foundation when she was in her 70s, after nearly losing her life. And look at what she created. Applause filled the room. So today, as we celebrate 20 years of this wonderful organization, we aren't just celebrating what's been done, we're celebrating what still can be done. Every animal that can still be saved, every family that can still be helped, every life that can still be touched. My mother's work continues, and it will continue as long as there are people willing to make a difference. The applause grew louder. Margaret stepped off the stage with tears in her eyes, but also with a smile. That night, alone at home, Margaret looked at the photos on the wall. Photos of her mother, of Amber, of Bear, of Faith, of so many important moments. "Thank you, Mom," she said to Mrs. Helen's photo, "for everything, for every lesson, every moment, every memory. You taught me to live, truly." And it was true. Mrs. Helen had taught, not just through words, but through actions, how to live a meaningful life, how to love without reserve, how to make a difference, no matter how late in life, how to never give up, even when things seem impossible. Those lessons lived in Margaret. They lived in Amber. They lived in all the people who had been touched by Mrs. Helen's kindness, and they would live forever, passed down from generation to generation, a story of love, resilience, and hope. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story? Where are you listening to us from? Did Mrs. Helen make the right decisions by helping so many animals? How would you have reacted in Margaret's place when you discovered your mother's secrets? We'd love to read your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories.